Okay. Hi, everyone. I hope you can hear me. I will give people maybe like 30 seconds more, just because we're getting quite a lot of people joining right now, or maybe not. Okay. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Alex. I'm a senior policy officer in England, and I'm happy to welcome you all to our joint Hempsons and Care England webinar, where we're focusing on where we are now with the CQC. Today's part of our webinar series with Hempsons, where Philippa Doyle, partner and head of health and social care, head of the health and social care advisory team at Hempsons, will offer her support and insight into the key changes in the regulatory environment. Philippa will also take you briefly through the consultation, the ongoing CQC consultation, and where we're heading, and provide a recap on the things you need to do to get things right currently. When Philippa's talking, feel free to use the chat function and the CQC function to raise any, or the Q&A function to raise any questions. You can also email me. I'll put my email in the chat in case you want to ask any questions anonymously. Otherwise, I would ask that you remain muted during the presentation, and we'll open it up to a Q&A at the end where you can raise your hands if you want to ask a question directly. Okay, let me just sort that out. Sorry about the echo. There'll be a recording of the session, and our intention is to note any questions and send a Q&A plus a copy of the recording within about 48 hours of the webinar ending. Depending on the questions that are raised, along with contact details and any other information that comes up and links. So without further ado, let me hand over to Philippa to start us off today.
Thank you, Alex. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm really pleased to welcome everybody on this rather chilly Tuesday afternoon in December. I am going to share my screen. So hopefully everybody can see those slides. If someone can give me a thumbs up to make sure you can see everything, and then we'll get cracking. Brilliant. Thanks, Dean. So CQC, where are we now? Where are we going? This is a fantastic question. If only I knew, if only we all knew. But I'll try and take you through what I do know and just give you some reassurance about the future as well. So for those of you who don't know me, I think most people on the call probably do. You've probably watched enough of my webinars already. My name's Philippa Doyle. I'm head of the Health and Social Care Advisory team at Hempsons. 25 years experience now, and large parts of that I have ended up becoming a bit of a specialist in CQC. So today we're looking at where are we now and what's coming down the line, but also a little bit of a recap on, regardless of what's happening with CQC, what do you need to know to get your service in the best possible shape and get you inspection ready, if you like. So when we last met in early September, I was talking about changes coming down the line, and effectively we are still in the same place as we were during that last webinar. If CQC turn up tomorrow or next week, they're still operating under the single assessment framework. They're still looking at those 34 quality statements, although not looking at number 34 on sustainability. And we're still seeing evidence that those services who are getting the better ratings, who are securing a really good, or even getting up to outstanding, are the ones who've put the time and effort in, who've properly prepared for the process, who are ready to showcase their evidence to CQC to show all of the good work that's going on in their service. What I am not going to do today is I'm not going to speculate too much about the future or hypothesize too much around whether what's in the consultation document will actually materialize in real life. I was on a webinar session last Thursday, and there was a lot of hypothesis about what this might mean and about what that might mean. Ultimately, I think we all know a consultation is a consultation. What's appropriate is that we input into it, but things can change as a result of what's said. And so we can't read too much into what might happen next year with CQC just by looking at that consultation document. Ultimately, my takeaway, and the things that I say to everybody time and time again, the regulations, the law that underpins what you do as services and as service providers has not changed. All that has changed with the single assessment framework is the methodology by which CQC come in and assess your service. And all that might change in the coming months and years is how CQC assess and inspect you. Ultimately, the regulations are the most important things. The fundamental standards of care are what you have to deliver services against. And that is ultimately the baseline that CQC assess you against, just using, whatever framework that sits on top of it. So in terms of what you're doing as a service provider, just keep doing what you're doing. But if you do it one thing differently, it's just documenting everything better, because that's what services fall down on, is they've not got the documentation in place that evidences and substantiates all of the good work that's going on within the service. So we do need to talk about the consultation. It was launched on the 16th of October, so a good 6 or 7 weeks ago now. I've put a link on the slide to the consultation, but it's very easy to find if you Google it anyway. It closes at 5 o'clock on the 11th of December, so that's a week on Friday. So please, 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 because it impacts on you, have a read of the consultation document, answer the specific questions they ask, and then there's a free text, any other comments box at the end. Put your comments in there. This is your opportunity, a bit like voting for politicians. This is your opportunity to have your say around what works, what doesn't work, what changes you want to take place, what things in the single assessment framework you think work and that you want to keep. So you can either follow the link, you can just send them an email with your thoughts, you can even write to them with pen and paper if you want to. All of the details are on the website. But on the whole, I say this is a golden opportunity for you to, if you've not made it along to any of the consultation events, your golden opportunity to have your say about what you think works and doesn't work and what changes you want in place. I've sat there and gone through the document. I have made my submissions. I've said my piece. And on the whole, I support what they're proposing. I support the changes. But I have used it as an opportunity to object to removing the scoring, because I think for social care, scoring is actually one of the best things in the single assessment framework. And I have used it as an opportunity to talk about the training of inspectors as well, and the massive variation in approach up and down the country that I see around their approach to inspection. You can have somebody coming in looking for good, somebody else coming in looking for bad, and it can really set a very different tone to how your inspection goes on the day. So what I really would like to see from CQC is some consistency around the training that they give their inspectors, so that we all feel like that we're working on a level playing field, and we're not at the mercy of what side of bed the inspector got out of that morning. So as I say, use it as an opportunity to have your say. I'm also really pleased to say that Care England and the Care Provider Alliance on your behalf have had a seat at the table, inputting into changes to the quality statements and inputting into changes to the single assessment framework. And I was absolutely delighted to be able to assist in a review of some of the work that has gone on. And I was really, really pleased with what I saw. It was all looking good. There were obviously some niggles and some bits and pieces that we thought, yeah, this is a little bit too NHS-y, and how does this impact with social care providers? But there's been a lot of what we're calling deduplication work that's gone on. So a number of the quality statements have been merged together or been simplified. We're looking at seeing, somewhere between maybe about 20 and 24 quality statements in the future, rather than the current 34 that we've got. There's suggestion in the consultation that those quality statements are going to be called something else, but they are fundamental. That's what they fundamentally are, is the quality statements that we've started to get used to. Lots of simplification of the language, though, makes it really clear. There's some really good bullet points underneath each quality statement around what good looks like, what CQC are looking for from you. But as I say, fundamentally, there's no change in the regulations, and there's no change in those 5 domains that we're used to working with in terms of safe, effective, caring, responsive, and well led. So that's where we're going and where we are now. So what I then thought I'd do, rather than spending too long, as I say, hypothesizing on what may or may not happen, was do a recap for you on how to get things right. Because as I say, regardless of what this framework might look like and how CQC assess you in the future, they are only ever going to be assessing you fundamentally against the regulations, so against the fundamental standards of care. I've got a very dog-eared copy of my regulations here, printed out, carry them around with me everywhere, tea-stained, whatever, but ultimately they are my Bible, because they are fundamentally, as I say, what CQC assess you against. They're the Health and Social Care Act 2008 Regulated Activities Regulations from 2014, and in the middle is a section that's headed Fundamental Standards. And Regulation 8 says, generally, a registered person must comply with regulations 9 to 20 capital A when you're carrying on a regulated activity. So whatever framework CQC assess you against, these regulations are going to sit under that framework. So whether we're talking about quality statements, whether we're talking about CLOEs, whether we're talking about some new terminology, ultimately they're looking for compliance against these regulations. So if you do one thing after today, go away and get a copy of those regulations. You can get them off the internet for free, and sit down and read that middle section from Regulation 8 onwards. They're really layman friendly. You don't need to be a lawyer to read them, but I do a half-day training if you want a bespoke session to kind of take you through the regulations and bring them to life. There's a lot of people up and down the country that certainly the feedback has been really positive, that they've found my training really helpful to take you through those regulations and just really make sure that you understand what person-centred care actually is, what CQC are looking for that evidence of person-centred care or safe care and treatment. Do go back and visit the old publication, Key Lines of Inquiry and Ratings Characteristics as well. Again, you can Google it, it's still kicking around on the internet. And it is actually still a really helpful read. It gives you a real feel for what CQC are looking for in terms of what the description of a requires improvement or a good or an outstanding practice is. A lot of that documentation is being updated and is being translated into the future. I understand we're likely to get an updated version of it in 2026 from CQC, but whilst we're waiting for it, do go back and revisit that old one as well, because it's still really helpful in terms of shaping any kind of activities and developments and any improvement activities within your service as to how you get things up to scratch. So where do I start as a provider? I'm having an overhaul. I think, right, okay, I'm going to use this as an opportunity to do a deep dive and progress things and try and get things right. So I would always suggest that a service focus their attention on two areas, and that's safe and well led. A lot of them overlap. A lot of the quality statements overlap between safe and well led, and a lot of the provisions in the regulations overlap between safe and well led as well. You're looking very much at risk assessments and care plans and making sure that the two go hand in hand and mirror the service that you're delivering, whether that's on a person by person basis, but also on a much broader kind of business continuity basis as well. Cross-refer the quality statements with the regulations. When you read through the safe quality statements and read through the well-led quality statements, you can see how they link with the regulations and what areas are most important. Have a think about where you think your service is really compliant, what evidence you've got already to demonstrate compliance with that quality statement, where the gaps might be, what work you might need to do within your service just to pull your socks up a little bit and get those better scores. You're going to have loads of really great evidence within your service already. So have a look at whether there's anything that you could turn into a case study, or have a look at the detail in your care plan documentation. and then go back to the regulations and look at the key 4 areas, because there will be absolutely loads of really good work and loads of good news stories that are going on within your service. And they don't need to be really big ticket items. They can be really small examples that have made a massive difference to an individual person. But it's a case of collecting all of those together and making sure that CQC read them so you can really showcase how you can shine. So I've mentioned that there's 4 main areas. When I do my training, I talk about there being 4 regulations that are the big 4 that you need to focus on, and the rest kind of fall into place as well. So the first 2 that I always take together are Regulation 9, person-centred care, and then Regulation 12, safe care and treatment. So Regulation 9, person-centred care, if we look at the actual wording of the regulation, it's really quite simple. And this is what I mean about the regulations being quite easy for a layman to read. Care and treatment of service users must A, be appropriate, B, meet the person's needs, and C, reflect their preferences. A and B go hand in hand, and you will probably have done A and B before somebody even comes into your service as a new service user or a new person that you support, because you've had a little bit of a pen picture, you've done a little bit of assessment on them, and you've decided whether it's somebody that you're able to support within your service. Person-centred care is all about reflecting someone's preferences, but making sure that they're involved insofar as possible around decisions that affect them, making sure that they or their nearest family member are involved in the shaping of the service, and really understanding the delivery of care and the options that are available to the person. There are 9 key things that CQC are looking for within your care planning documentation to demonstrate that you're delivering person-centred care, and the regulations set those out really clearly. But so much of person-centred care is the little things that make a difference. It's the person who has a goal and aspiration to be able to support themselves or get out of bed themselves in a morning. Many services would say, oh, well, that's just our job. That's just what we do. That, we want to give people that independence and foster that independence. But you can mark that down as someone's goal or aspiration if they want to be able to do that themselves. And then you can plot their progress as to how long it takes and what support you can give to enable them to do that for themselves. And that could be a great case study in showing how you've supported that person-centred care in terms of reflecting that person's preferences and helping them to achieve their goals and aspirations. So there's lots of tiny little things that can really add up to make a difference around how someone's supported. Regulation 12 is the really big regulation that if anything's going to go fundamentally wrong in your service, that's where a prosecution might come under safe care and treatment, or failure to deliver safe care and treatment. But again, the wording in the regulation is quite simple and quite straightforward. Care and treatment must be provided in a safe way for service users. And the regulations then go on to give you a list of the things that a registered person must do to comply. And the top 2 on that is around assessing the risk to health and safety of service users of receiving care and treatment, and then doing all that's reasonably practicable to mitigate any such risks. So that's twofold. That's around your individual risk assessments of each person that you support, and then the care plans that have flowed from those risk assessments that show how you're going to reasonably practicably mitigate those risks. It's not about wrapping people in cotton wool. It is about facilitating independence and giving people their independence and supporting them wherever possible. But it's being realistic. We can't do everything for everybody. We can't mitigate every risk. But as long as we've done detailed risk assessments, and as long as those are translated through into decent care plans that show how we're going to support somebody, what we need to be aware of, for example, with someone with difficult behaviours, for example, or that needs medication delivering in a particular way, that we're able to address all of that, and that we've got no inconsistencies between the risk assessments and the care plans, because that's where lots of services fall down. You start to update your risk assessments because somebody's had a number of falls, you get distracted part way through, and then those risk assessments and the updates don't quite get translated through into the care plans. So do make sure that that's a seamless transition in terms of those documentations, because CQC will find the gaps. But risk assessments aren't just about risk assessing the individuals that you support. They're about risk assessing the whole service as well. So that's your business continuity plans. We could do a whole separate session on business continuity around all the things that can and do go wrong in a service, and what steps you need to take as an organisation to protect and prepare yourselves. But it's very much around thinking about, what those kind of top 3 family fortunes entries might be. And certainly for most services, cybersecurity is now at the top of that list of what would happen if the IT went down, and would we be able to access our records? Would we still be able to pay people? Would we still be able to run the business? Second and top answer is often, what about if and when staff don't turn up for work? Because that's regularly an issue as well. What arrangements have we got in terms of getting people in to do overtime, or arrangements with an agency where we've got dedicated people already with that agency that we're used to working with us, that have done our induction process, so can kind of hit the ground running really easily. And then your third entry in your family fortunes of business continuity is likely to be the weather. As we're going into winter, we've had some flurries of snow already, and some services might have been impacted by that. We've had an awful lot of water recently, an awful lot of rain, and I'm sure that there will be plenty of flooding in some areas. So in low-lying areas, you might have more preparedness arrangements as to, which farmers have got a tractor that you can get you across a river when one suddenly appears because a road's flooded. I know one service that knew where they could get hold of boats to get to villages that would get cut off, or had got the fire brigade on speed dial to be able to get the fire engine through a flooded road. So it's very much about knowing kind of your location and what your weather risks are in your area. And of course, the weather can impact on staff getting to work as well, which might lead back into your second answer. And if you've got a generator in the basement that gets flooded, that might impact on your top answer as well in terms of cyber and IT issues. There are lots of business continuity issues that can feed together. But again, CQC are looking for something really practical. I've seen some services that have tried to do really complex risk matrices around the likelihood of a risk arising or likelihood of something going wrong. That's lovely, but CQC want to see something really practical. They want to know that the registered manager in the service knows that, if a tree fell on the roof, what do they need to do? If they had a gas leak, or, if they had a water leak, what's the phone number of the emergency plumber? What's the phone number of the emergency gas engineer? How do you deal with those practical problems and those practical situations? There's lots of other elements of safe care and treatment, though, that are really important to look at in terms of staffing and training, medication management, lots of different bits and pieces. But they're both a really good area to start when you're looking at development and improvements within the service. I've covered much of this already, but person-centred care is very much around caring for people beyond their condition. We all kind of pretty much take for granted that your service is going to deliver what people need. Whether we're actually giving them what they want is very much where you are able to demonstrate that you're delivering person-centred care. So tailoring the service to suit that individual's wants, respecting their views on what's best for them, letting them have their own values and priority in life, engaging with them and to ensure you know what their values are, and engaging with them again to make sure that those values haven't changed. I've known any number of services that have been criticised by CQC because they've been seen to be getting people up really early in the morning, of people that get up at 5 or 6 in the morning. And that's because that's what people have done their entire lives. And so that's what they want to do as an older person in retirement, because they've always been an early riser. But if it's not properly documented in their care plans that that's what they want to do and why they want to do it, then CQC can be very quick to criticise. So whilst we all may know all of our service users really, really well, it's important that we don't get complacent around what we know about them as individuals, and that we're not referencing that within the documentation as well, because that's where the gaps can show and where it can sometimes let us down. And so, as I say, those goals and aspirations, whether they're big, I did some work with a service recently with a gentleman with learning disabilities whose mum lived in Malta. And the service did a phenomenal amount of work in terms of introducing him, taking him into the airport, familiarising him with how to get on an aeroplane, even being able to go and sit on an empty plane to, to learn how to do his seatbelt up on the plane. And eventually he was able to travel to Malta to see his mum on his own. Which was a massive goal for him, and something that the service were able to plot and able to demonstrate what a big achievement that had been for him. But really small things, as I say, the person that wants to be able to get up on their own, can be just as an important a goal and aspiration that can really evidence and showcase the dedication and the good work that's going on within your services. And all too often that gets missed in services, and those that are getting the outstanding ratings often are the ones who are just capturing all of those little stories in a much better way so that they can evidence to CQC what a difference they're making. Use your staff teams as champions as well. Many years ago, I used to say to people that, identify somebody to be your person-centred care champion. And I had one service who actually did just that, and had one member of staff who went round and visited every single person that was supported to find out something different about them so that they could be supported in a different way, so that they could evidence that they were delivering person-centred care. But actually, every single member of your staff teams can be person-centred care champions. They know the people that you support better than anybody else. You can get them to reflect daily on how they've made a difference. One service that I worked with were fantastic. On the back of the staff toilet door, they had a sign where they said, think about 3 things: where you've made a difference to somebody's life, where you've made a difference to a colleague's life, and where a colleague's made a difference to your life. What made you smile today? And just that reflection and that thought process that you could kind of translate into saying, okay, get each member of staff before they log off, before they leave their shift at the end of the day, just to write down one little thing where they've made a difference to somebody's life. It might just mean that, we got Moody Mary to smile, and she never ever smiles at anybody. Or it could be a really big achievement of someone who's been able to do something for themselves that they couldn't do previously. But you've made a difference. Staff members, like all of us, will naturally go to the negatives and how hard their day's been. But actually, if you think about all the positives and all the little things that you've done and where you've made a difference to someone's life, and you're doing that on a day-by-day basis, suddenly you've got, a back pocket full of positive news stories that you can share with CQC around how you've made a difference within your service. Because your staff teams and the people that you support are the services champions. They are the ones who are going to be talking to the CQC inspector when they come into the service. And they're the ones that can really demonstrate whether it's a really good service that they want to work with, because they're talking about things in a really positive way, rather than a service where they're very quick to whinge and moan about being overworked and underpaid, which, we know is the harsh reality of working in social care. So it's very much about giving people tools, give them the right information, get them to think about things in different ways so that they can do the heavy lifting for you, they can do the hard work, and they can shout about how great it is to work in your service. You're not just reliant on everything that the registered manager has to say. So safe care and treatment, as I've already mentioned, make sure those risk assessments and care plans marry up. That has to be your biggest takeaway. But do keep everything under a regular review as well, and look at the individual elements of safe care and treatment under the regulations. So we've got those risk assessments and how we mitigate those risks that I've already talked about. We've got to make sure that we've got competent staff and that the training's right for them. We've got to make sure that our premises and equipment are right, that we've got sufficient quantities of medication and equipment, particularly coming up to the long Christmas and New Year bank holidays. We've got to make sure that our medication management's right. And actually that links back into what I was just talking about when I mentioned the weather earlier. Although we focus on bad weather and what happens with flooding and what happens in winter in the snow, we saw things happen the other way around with the heat over the summer. Lots of medication has to be kept at room temperature, which is kind of 20-25 degrees. And so lots of medication might be stored in a locked cupboard somewhere. But if that locked cupboard is actually a metal cabinet, maybe it's your controlled drugs that are in a locked metal cabinet that are supposed to be kept at room temperature. All of a sudden in the middle of summer, we were having temperatures of 30, 35 degrees. We had 40 degrees a few years ago, didn't we? But if you've got a metal cabinet, it's going to be even hotter in there. And so those drugs and that medication may well be perishing and may not be at its best because it's not actually being kept at room temperature. So do have a think about how things might impact on you at different times of year. And although those hot days are few and far between, they can have an impact, particularly if CQC happen to come in on the day with their own thermometer, and they will make a beeline for those drugs cabinets and check to see whether there's a fan there or another way of cooling things down if the meds are being stored at slightly too high a temperature. Infection prevention and control is obviously something that post-COVID everybody's great at in terms of donning and doffing, but do make sure that those hard to reach areas are the ones that get cleaned as well. CQC are very good at looking for rust under shower chairs, checking dust down the back of radiators and on top of wardrobes. So just make sure you're on top of everything. And particularly if you're hiding a whole load of broken equipment in a locked cupboard somewhere, just get rid of it. They will find it. They'll find that cupboard. I heard a GP last week talk about dusty corners. You can have physical dusty corners in your building, but you can have dusty corners in relation to your record keeping and your file management and your medication management. So just think about all of those different kind of dusty corners that you might have to deal with. And then finally, shared care is normally one of the biggest areas of controversy in relation to shared care and treatment. Every single person that you support as a social care provider, you're supporting through a shared care arrangement, because every single person will at the very least have their GP involved. But the vast majority of people that you support may well have district nurses, tissue viability nurses, diabetes nurses, mental health practitioners, a whole host of people involved in their care and support. It's really, really important to make sure that your communication with all of those different bodies is as tip top as it possibly can be. It was easy in the olden days when we had paper records, particularly for dom care providers, that your records were in the person's home, the district nurse's records were there, and you could have a quick flick through the records and see what was going on. Now that we're all digital and electronic, we're all, very, very conscious of not sharing information with the wrong people. But actually, we do then end up in a situation where we're actually not sharing the right information with other health and social care providers. Sometimes to share is as important as to keep confidential. So when you're in that direct care relationship, the GDPR does actually give you the ability to share information with other providers without needing the person's consent, because it's really important that you make sure that you're all on the same page and you're not doing anything that might be detrimental to anyone. So certainly in those shared care relationships, do make sure that communication is priority, because as soon as the communication falls down, that's when things start to go, unfortunately, hideously wrong, which in some cases can end up being fatal for the person concerned. So what else do we need to look at? Well, we've looked at 2 out of those big 4 in the regulations, Regulation 9, Person-Centred Care, and Regulation 12, Safe Care and Treatment. The next 2 big ones are Regulation 17, Good Governance, and Regulation 18, Staffing. So good governance is basically the whole of the well-led section of your CQC report. It's about how the organisation operates and how that you ensure that you're delivering good and safe care. So the regulations require you to have systems or processes that are established and operated effectively to ensure compliance with the requirements of this part. And ostensibly, although you'll all have lovely policies and procedures in, ring binders on a shelf or in an intranet area of your website, the key things around policies and procedures are making sure that they're accurate and up to date, but also making sure that staff actually live and breathe them, that they aren't just, sitting on a shelf looking all shiny or, hidden away on the intranet, that staff are really familiar with, the requirements of the policies. CQC always look to see that things are embedded within the service. Do staff actually follow what the policy says that they're supposed to be doing? And can we see that in the way that care is delivered? CQC love an audit as well. So auditing is all about good governance as well. They love an audit that identifies some gaps and weaknesses. They love an action plan that shows what we're going to do and when we're going to do it. And even better, they love it when we can demonstrate that we're working our way through it and we're getting things ticked off the list. In terms of staffing under Regulation 18, we've got to have sufficient numbers of suitably qualified, competent, skilled and experienced persons. They're never going to tell us what sufficient numbers means. That's very much down to you as a service to make sure that you've got a dependency tool in place and that you can demonstrate how and why you need a certain number of staff on shift and what the skill mix is. I've done work with services in the past who've tried to tell me and tell CQC that they don't need a dependency tool because they know their staff and they know the people that they support so well that they know exactly who they need on shift and when and where and why. But CQC will not have it. They want to see use of that dependency tool so that you can truly demonstrate that you've got the right people around. And in terms of the people that you employ, you have to ensure that they receive appropriate support, training, professional development, supervision and appraisal as is necessary to enable them to carry out the duties they're employed to perform. So a lot of overlap there in terms of Regulation 18 and Regulation 12 around staffing, around training, professional development, supervision, making sure that mandatory training's all done and all ticked off, and that you've got a policy in place so that if people are trying to work when they've not done all of their mandatory training, they stop getting shifts until that mandatory training is all done and ticked off. Otherwise, it will come back to bite you. So, as I say, not just about the policies and procedures, about having those meaningful action plans to make changes and make things happen. And in that respect, as a manager, it doesn't all fall on your shoulders. I know it might feel like it does, but it really doesn't. Make sure you delegate as much as you possibly can. Make sure you involve the team. I certainly find if I involve the juniors in my team, I get so much more buy-in in making something happen. They can dictate the direction of how things are moving. They can really get those policies and procedures embedded. They can get the changes embedded because they can see why it's important, because they're really being involved in that process rather than just being told what to do. You'll know within your team who's ready to accept a little bit more responsibility. And if you give people that responsibility, then generally they'll step up to the mark and they'll do what needs doing to help drive things forward. And they'll be so much better at calling each other out if they get things wrong, because they understand the importance of it. They're not just being dictated to by on high to get things right. In relation to staffing, a couple of key things that CQC do tend to pick up on time and time again. It's inevitable at some point that you're going to end up having to use some agency staff to pick up some of the shifts within your service. If you don't, you're in a fantastically lucky place, because certainly the vast majority of services will have to rely on an agent at some point. Do make sure that the arrangements for induction with those agency staff are as sharp as they possibly can be. If you're able to use the same people time and time again, as I mentioned earlier, that's your absolute best course of action, because they've had that induction process, they're used to your policies and procedures, and it's really easy for them to come into the service. It's really good to have all that evidence in place as well to be able to demonstrate to CQC that consistency of approach in using the same people. Support arrangements is really important as well. It used to be a word that I glossed over a few years ago, but certainly post-COVID and under the single assessment framework, it's something that CQC look at really closely. What support network and what support arrangements are in place for your staff teams? And I'm not just talking about an employee assistance program, or whether they can get 10% off goods in the local shops. It's that wraparound support that's available for those people that are working for you, particularly those who are working in more complex services with people with complex conditions. They might need their own mental health support. They might need the ability to withdraw from a service if there's been some verbal or physical abuse. They need to know that there's somewhere that they can kind of decompress to, and that the organisation's got their back and is able to deal with kind of that wellbeing support as well. There's a whole quality statement that looks at workforce wellbeing and enablement, and it is really, really important, as I say, to make sure that your staff teams are as supported as they can be in times where they're doing a very difficult job. So again, I often encourage services to throw that back to your staff teams and say to them, in an ideal service, what do you want us as bosses to deliver for you? What support are you looking for from us? What do you want from us? We might not be able to deliver against all of it, but equally there might be things that a provider down the road's doing, or your previous employer was doing, that we're not doing, that we might be able to make happen. And again, if they've had that consultation, if they've had that buy-in, if they've been able to shape what the support in their service looks like, then you might find that they're much more inclined to sing about what a great service they work for. Do make sure that you're getting feedback as well. Feedback is a really important thing that CQC are looking for a lot now, from the people that you support, from their family members, but also from staff teams as well. Staff have generally got an awful lot to say. Let's hear about all those negatives now, rather than them talking to CQC about them, so that we can show what support and what changes we can potentially put in place as an organisation to try and alleviate some of those concerns. Do those good news stories work though? Get them to think about the positive difference that they've made to people's lives on a day-by-day basis, so they've got those positive stories in their back pocket. Get them involved in that consultation around support for each other, because again, they can then start talking to CQC, and they can be that voice for you about how great the culture is in this organisation, because they really listen to us, they really involve us, they really get us involved in shaping what the organisation might look like in the future, and how we might be supported as staff teams. So it's not magic. Little bit of a whistle-stop tour then over kind of 4 key areas that I think services should concentrate on. But really, you don't need to be doing anything massively differently than what you were doing before. Just making sure you're getting those basics right. Make sure that you're meeting those regulatory standards, and you should come out with a good rating. The new assessments, the single assessment framework, whatever the new framework might be called, it's all about evidence. It's all about getting your documentation right all the time. It's about making sure your policies and procedures are up to date, that you've reviewed them, your care plans and your risk assessments are right, that you're reviewing them on a regular basis, that they're consistent with each other, you're getting that feedback, you're using it, you're making changes within the organisation, kind of continual improvements. Doesn't need to be massive changes. If you think about the British cycling team, the only way they were successful is because they made little 1% changes, but made loads of little 1% changes all over the place, and all of a sudden it really boosted them to excellence. And the same approach can be taken within your services as well. Don't try and build Rome in a day, because we know you can't, but you can do things one brick at a time, and make those little 1% changes that can show small little improvements all over the place. But above all, it's around preparation. Preparation. It's like going into an exam at school, going into your driving test, any other kind of situation. If you practice for it, if you revise, if you reviewed your documentation, if you make sure that you know what you're talking about, and everything's lined up and everything's ready, then you're going to stand a far better chance of getting a better rating at the end of that process than, you know, if you kind of shrug your shoulders and hope for the best, because it might work, but more often than not, it might not. Obviously, there is a tool to assist you with this process. Those of you who've been on my talks before will know that Care England and I created a toolkit, breaks down each of the 34 quality statements, tells you what they mean, tells you which regulations are engaged, tells you what key elements to focus on, so you can use it as a continuous development plan. You can make those, you know, 1% changes on a month-by-month basis. Pick 2 or 3 quality statements to focus on, set yourself some short time scales and set some specific action plans, and you can see some real results. And for this month only, for the whole of December, we're actually reducing the price of the toolkit as well. We're not calling it a Black Friday offer. It's, you know, Black Friday's been and gone, thank God, because my inbox was just overwhelmed with annoying emails. Alex has very kindly put the link in the chat, but it's there on the slides, and you'll get some detail when the slides come out as well. So the toolkit's available at a reduced price throughout December, and that's a fantastic way of, as I say, really kind of going through everything and breaking everything down to help you understand and identify where there might be some gaps and deficiencies within your service that that hopefully you can improve. And I know that changes are coming down the line. We know that things are going to change in 2026 with CQC. So anybody that does buy the version 1 of the toolkit, there will be a revised version that will come out in 2026. And anyone that bought version 1 will get version 2 free of charge. But any work that you do now in preparation is going to stand you in good stead, because it's an opportunity for you to break down each element of your service, to look at how support plans are written, to look at how care plans are written, to look at whether there are any gaps in your risk assessment or any gaps in your policies or the way that staff are being supported. So all of this is going to be really valuable preparation, moving things forward. And on the back of the toolkit, once you've had a look at it, if anybody wants some bespoke in-service training as well to bring the toolkit to life, I've done lots of different shapes and sized workshops with all sorts of different providers as well to kind of help go through everything and help you really embed and understand everything. So as I say, that's been a little bit of a whistle-stop tour from me, but I hope that's been helpful. There's obviously an and finally and some dates for your diary. I'm delighted I'll be at the Care England conference on Thursday, the 12th of March. I very much hope by the time I come to speak at the conference, I'll have something concrete to say about what CQC's next lot of changes are going to look like and what the new assessment process will be look like. And anybody that can't make it to conference, we will rerun my conference speech in a webinar on the 7th of April as well. So 2 dates for your diary to start with, but there will be more dates to follow in 2026 and more specific CQC sessions when we know more about what the changes will be like coming down the line. But otherwise, as Care England members, you know, a little bit of a final plug, you are entitled to half an hour's worth of free advice. Please do use the social care advice line or drop me an email. Always very happy to help members where I can to address any bits and pieces of queries. We're a full service law firm, so we don't just do CQC. We can support on pretty much anything other than divorce or taxes. So, you know, I don't want to talk to you about last week's budget, but we're very much able to help sense check plans and point you in the right direction or guide you if you need any more detailed advice from anybody. But otherwise, that's me and my colleague Jelena, if ever you've got any CQC queries. But otherwise, thank you very much, Alex. And I think there were some questions that came up in the chat, so I'll stop sharing my screen and I'll pause and take a breath.
Thank you, Philippa. That was fantastic. Just to sort of summarize going through everything very briefly, essentially, there hasn't been a lot of change. It's still, at the moment, single assessment framework, 34 quality statements, and it's just about preparation for inspection and showcasing evidence and showcasing your service.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we heard that there's scope to contribute to the changes through the ongoing consultation, which everyone who's on this call should really be participating in.
Yep.
But regardless of the outcome of the consultation, the way that the CQC frameworks will look won't change the fact that they're underpinned by Section 2 fundamental standards in the Health and Social Care Act.
Yep.
Reading these and the old key lines of inquiry and ratings characteristics documentation is already will give everyone a really fantastic overview. The sort of key takeaway that I took from that is really that there's nothing you need to do massively differently based on what's happened over the last year. And the new assessments are all just going to be, the changes will be about evidence, not about the sort of fundamentals that are underpinning, what's being asked of you. And you just need to keep yourself prepared for assessment, essentially. So if we move on to questions, if anyone wants to post questions in the chat or raise their hands, we'll come to people as and when. The first couple of questions we've got, I don't know if you can give any advice regarding the way that the CQC wants support plans to be written in terms of first person or third person.
I can't. This is a perennial issue that they chop and change what they want. And I think my personal view is it depends on your service and it depends on the person that's being supported. If you are supporting somebody who has capacity and who is able to communicate for themselves and say, I would like, toast rather than cereal for breakfast, then you can write it in that first person, because the person can say, this is what I would like. But if you're supporting somebody who lacks capacity or who is non-verbal or who has never been in a position to properly express what they would like for themselves, I always think it feels a little bit artificial for that to be written in the first person of I would like this and I would like that, when that person hasn't ever been able to express that. And so, to my mind, writing that kind of care and support plan in the third person would be more appropriate. But it's not actually something that I've seen CQC recently criticise in reports. The focus has very much been on ensuring that the content of the care plan is consistent with the risk assessment and is consistent with the way that the person needs to be supported, and has got those goals and aspirations in it, and is very clear on how the person is to be supported. So it certainly feels in recent times that there's been less focus on whether it's written as I or in the third person, and it's the content and the detail that's most important.
Yeah, so it's about the substance, and if you're doing something that feels a tiny bit unusual, writing in first person or third person about someone and they're not writing it directly, just having a sense of why you're doing that and being able to explain that to an inspector, probably.
Absolutely.
So the other question we have is just about how, what our expectations are around the CQC accepting different kinds of evidence, paper versus purely online. I know that lots of people have had trouble with their online platforms in the past.
Yeah, the portal, I think, has been the top answer in Family Fortunes in terms of criticism with CQC recently. My experience around mixed evidence is that it's fine and CQC will accept it. So whether it's digital information and paper-based information, as long as it's consistent. So if you've got part of your service that's digital and part of it that is still paper-based, as long as you are absolutely clear on what sits where and that the two systems, are joined up, that's absolutely fine. Where I've seen services fall down is where systems have been updated online and are updated in real time, but only the registered managers got access to that system. So they print all the care plans and the risk assessments off, but they only print them off once a month. So the staff teams might not always have access to the most up-to-date information. And when CQC come to look at it and they see the potential for an inconsistency, then that's where the service will fall down. And so again, I've had services say, oh, but we've got this book, we've got this communication book, and we always write in the communication book when a care plan's been updated if it's not been reprinted yet. And it's just a recipe for disaster. So CQC want that real clarity around if you are still operating a mixed system, and many services are, just being really, really clear on, you know, what information is where, so that, you know, you can talk CQC through that process.
Yeah. So I get much like the first question, being aware that if you're doing something inconsistently, seemingly, that you have a sort of reason for it and there's justification that has been thought through. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay.
And it's very much around imagining you've got a new member of staff coming into the service, or that agency worker who might be an agency worker who's really familiar with, you know, with your service, with the people that you support. You know, can they really quickly navigate their way around the system to find the most up-to-date information they need? You know, you know, somebody that's been on leave for a fortnight and has come back into the service said, you know, a lot can happen in a fortnight. Are they going to be looking at the computer system for the most up-to-date information? Are they going to be looking at paper copy care plans? If they looked at both, would they both say the same thing, or would they say something different? And so would they be standing there scratching their head going, well, you know, how do I actually support Mary? You know, because things seems to have changed since I was last here. If there's any doubt, if there's any inconsistency, CQC will find it, and, you know, and they'll drive a coach and horses through it.
Right. I received one other question, which was that you talked about objecting to the removal of the scoring in the consultation. And you noted that it was one of the better things in the single assessment framework. And I was just asking why you think it was one of the better.
It's very much my personal opinion, but under the old system, you would get massive paragraphs of text under safe. And sometimes it wasn't really obvious why a service had come out with a requires improvement rating. You know, what were the key things that CQC were really focusing on? Or did they generally just think it was a bit of a rubbish service? It made it quite difficult for a provider to really kind of pinpoint where the areas of weakness were that they really needed to work on. And I personally think with the scoring under the quality statements, you know, you could be coming out getting, you know, 3s on everything. And then something has gone really wrong on, you know, infection prevention and control, and you're scoring a 1 or a 2. And it means that it's really obvious, because you can see where the scoring's dropped, that's my particular weakness in my service. Or if, you know, if you've got a couple of areas where you're scoring 2s, but everything else is scoring 3s, you know, you can see what the areas of focus are of where CQC's major concern is, that you as a provider then need to focus on to drive improvements going forwards. And in that respect, I think the scoring is really, really helpful. It also means as well that when you've got your overall scoring, if you're only a couple of percentage points off the next rating up, again, you can focus in on, you know, where are my areas of weakness? Is it something that I want to challenge under a factual accuracy challenge? Because actually I've got a whole bunch of evidence that I didn't realise was relevant that I want CQC to look at now that might push that 2 into a 3 and might mean I get a good overall. Or just in terms of, you know, points moving forwards of areas of improvement. As I say, you know where to invest your time, where to invest your money, to drive improvements going forward for next time CQC come knocking.
Yeah, that makes sense. There's the clarity that comes with them just having to pin down a single number for a particular area.
Absolutely, and I know certainly in a lot of the consultations that the Care Provider Alliance did with providers, the overwhelming feedback was that the scoring was one of the things that providers really liked. I don't think it's favoured as much in the NHS, but certainly from social care providers, they liked the breakdown of the different, you know, individual areas and knowing whether you're doing well in each individual area or not.
Okay, great. I mean, I think we probably just have time for one last question, and I suspect this is a relatively quick question to answer, which is what we can do in terms of requesting a CQC inspection. Leanne said that her service hasn't had one since 2019, and things have improved massively since that inspection, but can't prove that without an inspection.
Yeah, and Leanne, your story is a very similar one that I hear up and down the country all the time. Certainly what I have heard from any number of CQC presentations that I've been to recently is push for it. You know, try and get hold of a name of a locality lead in CQC in your area, and just email them and say, I want an inspection. Certainly if you've got contacts in your local authority, they've generally got really good contacts within CQC as well. That might be a way in of certainly if the local authority are in your corner as well and know that you're a really good service, but you're still stuck with an RI rating, or good and potentially looking at going to outstanding. Local authority can really be your ally in those respects in terms of trying to get CQC back out and into your service sooner rather than later. I know there's a real commitment from them to try and get as many services assessed and inspected as they possibly can going through 2026. So I'm hoping that they'll start to deal with that backlog. But of course, if we are looking at a new way of working and a new assessment regime, then it's going to take a little bit of time for them to retrain their staff teams again and get into that process.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I think we've hit 3 p.m, so I'm going to suggest that we leave it there. But I already sent it. Yeah, you can see pinned in the meeting chat that I have my email address. So if anyone has any additional questions, please feel free to send me an email, and we'll also send around Philippa's contact information if anyone wants to get in touch, and all of the information in the slides. But thank you everyone for joining us. I think this has been a really good webinar, and have a great afternoon.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks, everyone.